The most iconic rock guitar sound in history only exists because someone tried to copy another amp and sort of failed in doing so. And that amp basically changed guitar music forever. This is the amp that came out of it. And the crazy thing is, nobody planned for it to sound like this. And it almost didn't happen. Marshall wasn't trying to invent something new, they were just trying to copy another amp. Back in the early 60s, guitar players in London all had the same problem. The amps they were using were just not loud enough. Bands were getting bigger, crowds were getting louder. PA systems were not great back then, so miking a guitar amp was not really a thing, and the guitar amps by themselves just couldn't keep up with the volume. Now here's the interesting part. A lot of the music shops in London at the time didn't really take this young rock player seriously. Rock music was still new, loud, messy, and honestly a lot of shop owners just thought it was noise. But there was this one shop in West London run by Jim Marshall. And people say musicians loved going there because he actually treated them nicely. And I can say for myself, going to a music shop in central London is not one of the most welcoming experiences. But anyway, players like Pete Townsend, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck would literally hang out there. And a lot of them only bought their gear from him. And when musicians start hanging around a shop long enough, they start talking. Jim had a tech who was constantly repairing and servicing amps for guitar players too. They would bring their amps in and the same complaint kept coming up. They just were not loud enough. And back then, if your amp was not loud enough, the audience just couldn't hear you. So eventually the question stopped being, which amp should we buy? And started becoming, Jim, can you build us something louder than this? And here's the important bit. Jim Marshall was not an amp designer. He was a drum teacher. So instead of inventing something from scratch, he and his tech hired 2 EMI apprentices to reverse engineer an amp that everyone already loved, which was the Fender Bassman. Big, warm, loud. It was one of the gold standards at the time. So the plan was simple. Just build a British version of that. Except it didn't really work out that way. Because once they actually started building it, they realized they couldn't get the exact same parts. Different tubes, different transformers, different speakers. And all of those little changes started adding up. Until suddenly, it didn't really sound like a Bassman anymore. Their sound was way more aggressive than anything players were used to. It broke up earlier, it sounded rougher, louder, and more live. And for the first time ever, the guitar didn't just sit in the mix, it led the band. Once players heard that, there was no going back. They even had to build the full stack 4x12 to handle its power. Then you start seeing this wall of amps behind The Who, Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and many more. And that huge wall of British guitar sound suddenly becomes the sound of rock music. And it eventually crossed back over to the US. Kiss, Aerosmith, Van Halen, Guns N' Roses, the Marshall stack basically became the universal symbol of a rock band. And for me, it's crazy to think that all of this happened not because someone designed it that way, but because they were trying to copy something and couldn't quite pull it off. And here's another interesting part. That same character is exactly why people still use these amps today. Because what made them special back then is still what makes them special now. They're not super clean. They're not super polite. They feel like they're in your face and right on the edge the whole time. And when you hit them harder, they don't just get louder, they get angrier. They compress, they break up, the whole thing changes. And that's just a really unique feel to play into. And the thing with these amps is they're kind of weird. They don't really behave like modern amps. They have 4 inputs instead of 1 or 2. They don't have a gain knob or a master volume sitting there waiting for you. You actually have to push them loud. You turn them up, you hit the strings harder, and the sound sort of grows with you. And that means the guitar volume suddenly becomes really important. You roll it back, it cleans up. You push it forward, it bites. So instead of the amp doing everything everything for you. You end up playing the amp almost like it's another instrument. And honestly, the first time you plug into one, it can feel very unforgiving. But once you get used to it, that's exactly what makes it fun. I think that's why these amps have stuck around for so long. Not because they're perfect, because they're not. But there's just something really musical about them. They respond to how you play, they reward dynamics, they kind of force you to become part of the sound instead of just sitting on top of it. And I think that's why 60 something years later, you can still walk into any guitar shop in the world and find a Marshall amp. For me personally, whenever I want guitars to feel emotional rather than just big, the Plexi is the kind of sound I go for. I did a full live performance with this exact setup, same guitar into the same amp. If you want to hear what this sounds like into a real sound context, you should watch this video next. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.